Good morning, everybody. So it's the first time I've been acquainted with TED, and what everybody told me who's sort of under 30 in my office was that, TED's the shit, and here's what you have to worry about when you're going to make a TED Talk. You've got to have a really good story. TED is all about storytelling. And those stories should be reflected in some great visuals in the slides behind you. And you should just have a couple of slides and then talk directly to the audience. And so what we're going to do this morning is basically do the exact opposite of all of that. And there is an intentionality to this. What's going to be behind me while I'm talking is a fairly boring PowerPoint presentation with a white background and just the faintest hint of a graphic design element and a couple of key words. And so you'll bear with me as that's going on. So as I thought about the topic of the theme of this gathering today is here and now. And the topic or the theme of this morning's session is about systems and society. And so I thought about how can I create a good story about B Corps and what we're doing at the nonprofit that I'm running now called B Lab around systems and society. When what we're working on is things that don't typically get people jumping off their seat with standing ovations, because we're going to talk about business. But even worse than business, we're going to talk about corporate law. Anybody excited about talking about corporate law? There we go! Let's hear it for the lawyer in the house. We're going to talk about, and worse than corporate law, we're going to talk about standards, which obviously is always something that rivets people and gets them out of their seats. And then we're going to apply all those things to something called the capital market or finance or investments in Wall Street. And so all things that I know you're super excited to talk about and all the typical fodder for just great, compelling stories that you can tell over the water cooler. And to make matters worse, we're not going to tell these stories in your typical sort of Shakespearean three-act play. This is going to be more in the line of sort of Dave Eggers, fairly stream of consciousness, fairly complicated plot, lots of different things running around, which expects more of you, the audience, to stay with us. So with all that in mind, trying to think about a compelling story about systems and society, what I realize is that the system that we're working on, that we're working to evolve, is the system called capitalism. And the story is about the evolution of capitalism. And right here, right now, we're going through one of the biggest stories in the history of the world, which is how do we evolve capitalism from an outdated model that was dominant in the 20th century, which we'll call shareholder capitalism. Shareholders or investors or stockholders, the people that own the businesses that we patronize or invest in or work for. That 20th century model of capitalism has one rule in its operating system, and one rule only, which is the purpose of the corporation is to maximize shareholder value exclusively. That's it. Systems work best when they're exceedingly simple, and that is an extraordinarily simple system, and it works extraordinarily well to do what it is designed to do. That system is designed to maximize shareholder wealth, even if that means that there are significant, for the benefit of the doubt, unintended consequences, like environmental damage, human rights exploitation, or just playing with the numerator and denominator of return on investment, which means increase your numerator by externalizing your costs and lower your denominator by reducing the people that benefit from the wealth that's been created. That's just managing the math of ROI. That's what 20th century capitalism is all about. And what we're at right here, right now, is at an inflection point in the evolution of capitalism, moving towards a stakeholder capitalism, where the new operating system of capitalism is going to be about walking and chewing gum at the same time. It's about how do we create value not only for the shareholders that create the capital that enable us to grow and build our businesses, but simultaneously, how do we create value for society at the same time, for the workforce, for our communities, and for the environment. So that's basically the nutshell of what we're talking about. If there were a blurb to this story, the blurb has been written by a writer for Esquire, who also does some stuff for Mother Jones, who said that B Corps might turn out to be like civil rights for blacks or voting rights for women. Eccentric, unpopular ideas that took hold and change the world. Like every good blurb, it's fairly hyperbolic, and we do appreciate that. And I want to point out one of the problems with forums like this and the current sort of zeitgeist of storytelling is that a good story is not the whole story. Because behind every good story is either fact or exaggeration. It may be part of the story, but not all of the story. And so one of the main things I'd like you to take away from this, when we talk about green business, responsible business, sustainable business, a new capitalism, a creative capitalism, a conscious capitalism, we have to get behind the stories. Because anybody can tell a good story. The question is, what are the facts behind that story? And are they telling the full picture? And are they backed up by standards and metrics and ratings and things that make us trust in the story that we're being sold? Stepping back, the context for this, as someone who grew up thinking he wanted to be in politics or to run a nonprofit one day or do a great job as an educator, as good as what's going on with Chris at SLA, it was pretty devastating for me to recognize that governments and nonprofits are necessary but insufficient to the task of solving our most challenging problems. Whether you care about local living economies, sustainable agriculture, climate change, or poverty here or abroad, government's not going to be enough. Ideologically, wherever you fit on the spectrum, whether you want government to be involved or enough, I got news for you. Over the next 20, 30, 50 years, government will have less resource than it has now, not more. And even now with the resources we have, we're not making a dent in 3 billion people living under $2 a day or addressing the impact of climate change quickly enough. Nonprofits, as wonderful as they are, and as many places as the market cannot reach, and as important as that is for nonprofits to do there, it's really tough to do scalable change when you're walking around at the beginning of every year with a begging bowl, hoping that people take whatever's left in their pocket at the end of the year and give it to you to do your good works. Alms for the poor is not going to be sufficient. So the hard reality is that we have no choice but to harness the power of business to solve social and environmental problems. Business represents 3/4 of U.S. GDP and probably a bigger share of mind and cultural footprint. The good news is that there's a massive opportunity here. There's some wind at our backs. There's some amazing work that's been done over the last 20, 30 years to build momentum for this seismic shift in how we view business and business's role in society. There are over 60 million Americans who say that it matters to them not just about cost and convenience and quality, but also about the social or environmental impact of the products that they buy and the companies that are behind those products. There's $2.7 trillion worth of invested capital in the United States alone that's focused on more than just financial return. This is the socially responsible investing movement. And there's over 50,000 businesses across the country that are self-proclaimed triple bottom line businesses or sustainable businesses, folks that are focused on not just financial profit, but also people and planet and how their business impacts those things. The problem is that there's a lack of infrastructure. When I left Dan One, spent a couple of years with my partners, having been inspired, having had that insight that business needed to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem, talking with hundreds of entrepreneurs and investors and academics all around the country, and what became clear that it was a lack of infrastructure preventing those businesses from really scaling with the speed commensurate with the need. The three elements of infrastructure are these boring things, right? Because infrastructure just ain't sexy no matter how hard we try, right? Corporate law actually is unsupportive of businesses thinking this way with a triple bottom line attitude. There are no standards that let you know whether a company is green or responsible or sustainable, as they say. And there's a lack of access to capital that's focused on more than just sort of a negative screen to not put your money in tobacco or alcohol or something like that. To drive that point home, because there is some debate about this, there was a recent Delaware court case. Delaware is sort of the seat of corporate law in the United States, where Delaware confirmed in a famous case of Craigslist versus eBay that the only game in town, if you're a U.S. corporation, is to maximize shareholder value. That makes it awfully hard to care about what you're doing with your employees or what you're doing with your community or what you're doing with the environment when that's the law of the land, and if you don't do that, you can get sued. So the link of this from society and systems is systems should exist to serve society. And right now our capitalist system is not serving society, it's serving shareholders. And we can't run around expecting different outcomes until we change the rules of the game. But the story of a new capitalism, the story of an evolved capitalism, a stakeholder capitalism, doesn't manifest as an abstract idea. It manifests in the individual entities that are out there transacting business all day, that we can build, invest in, work for. And this new kind of company is called a B Corporation. It stands for the benefit that can be created for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. A B Corp meets higher standards of corporate purpose, accountability, and transparency. And most importantly, higher standards of performance measured by an independent third-party standard. If you're familiar with a LEED certified building or a fair trade bag of coffee, that's what a certification is. Think about the same thing, but the aperture on your lens is wider. The aperture is looking at the whole business. Because it's nice that it's a fair trade cup of coffee, but if they're dumping effluents or treating their workers poorly, that doesn't really help anybody. If you're giving all your profits to charity, but you're dumping toxics in the river behind your factory, that's not great either, right? So the issue is, how do we look at the whole company? And what we're doing is we're taking all these diverse movements, from the sustainable ag movement that we talked about before, to microfinance, to clean tech, to organics, to buy local, and we're saying all of those are manifestations of the same idea. How do we use business as a tool for social change? Whatever your passion is, the frame that you're fitting in is, how do I use business as a tool for social change? And how do we amplify the voice of this diverse marketplace behind the power of a unifying brand that stands for a better way to do business? The legal standards that B Corps meet is quite simple. They are legally obligated through a change to their corporate documents to consider the impact of their decisions not only on their shareholders but also on their workforce, their community, their suppliers, their consumers, and the environment. Pretty simple, but a fairly dramatic shift in whose interest the corporation is serving. They also meet performance standards. Those performance standards vary whether you're a service company or a manufacturer or a wholesaler, you're a paper mill or a footwear business or whatever, a law firm, and you're asked different questions, but they always talk about your company's employment practices, supplier practices, community engagement, and environmental practices. And the company has to achieve a minimum score of 80 out of 200 on an independent rating system run by a nonprofit in order to be eligible to be certified as a B Corporation. But even if they scored 140, they're not eligible to be certified as a B Corp unless they make that legal change so that that positive impact is built to last, not just through sort of the charismatic early CEO who sort of aligned with those values. Why do standards matter? How do we tell the difference between a good company and just good marketing? It's just a very simple question. Today, everybody claims to be green, responsible, and sustainable. And when everybody claims to be the same thing, those words mean less and less. Standards matter to lots of different people. As consumers, I can look for a fair trade symbol and identify that attribute about that coffee. Or I can look for the LEED plaque on a building and know that that building was met certain green building standards. So we as consumers use certifications like we look for brands. It's how you know what the brand stands for. But certifications are backed up not just by marketing, but they're backed up by rigorous third-party vetted audit process. Investors don't call it a certification, they don't call it a brand, they call it an asset class. But it's basically the same thing. How do they identify a certain class of investments that's having high social and environmental impact? And again, that's based upon you need ratings to do that. Policymakers, like those in Philadelphia that wanted to support certified sustainable businesses, they created a tax break right here in Philadelphia. The first tax break in the country for certified sustainable businesses was done right here in Philadelphia in December of last year. That's a big, big deal. But they couldn't do that unless there was a tool that helped them identify those who would qualify from that tax break and those that wouldn't. And the government doesn't have the expertise or the money to build the expertise to do that. So they rely on third parties, just like the GSA used LEED standards to integrate into green building over the last decade. Now municipalities and state governments and the federal government are talking about using B Corp standards to implement sustainable procurement programs across municipal, state, and federal purchasing. It's a very big deal. And companies looking to implement sustainable supply chains. So that all sounds very abstract and very nice, but are there any companies actually doing this? The nonprofit that I work with called B Lab has been around for about 4 years. We've been certifying B Corps for about 3, and there are already about 350 certified B Corps across 60 industries in 35 states across the country. You'll recognize some of the brand names that might be in at your house, like Method or Seventh Generation, or shoes like Dansko. You might bank at a place by New Resource Bank. You might get your solar panels installed by Southern Energy Management. A couple of these that just to give you a flavor of it, from sustainable ag business, like the Farmer's Diner, which combines like the most difficult part of sustainable ag, which is meat, because we Americans like our meat. It's easier to do fruits and veggies sustainably and locally. It's much harder to do meat, because over the last 50 years, all of the meat packing and processing stuff has been centralized, and so there isn't an opportunity for folks to raise cattle, pork, et cetera, locally and have local meat supplied. So they're doing the heavy lifting on sustainable ag up in Vermont and now moving out to San Francisco. Another amazing company out of New York City called the Freelancers Union. 30% of the American workforce is independent workers with lack of access to health care. Freelancers Insurance Company is solving that problem, providing quality, low-cost health insurance to the independent workforce. And they're doing it as a for-profit company that's making money and making a difference. That's a scalable solution. Manufacturing, heavy manufacturing out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, a company called Cascade Engineering, doing the same thing at scale, over 1,000 employees, $250 million company doing sustainable manufacturing at scale, moving into renewables. This group of companies has moved beyond certification to legislation. They're using they're now more than a community of companies. They are a constituency for the political change to create legislation that institutionalizes these values. And so Benefit Corp legislation is a legislation to create a new corporate form, no different than a C Corp or an S Corp or an LLC, that is passed in Maryland and Vermont this year. It's been introduced in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Michigan in 2011, and there are another 8 states waiting in line to pass legislation to create a new corporate form, to give entrepreneurs and investors another choice about the type of institution they want to create. The last piece of this is moving into capital markets. $2.7 trillion worth of socially responsible investing. A tiny fraction of that is invested directly in companies to create social and environmental impact. You can't invest for impact unless you measure impact. And a rating system, like the GEARS rating system that we've developed, which is using the same tool that we use to certify B Corps, but move it towards using it for investors to make better investment decisions. A rating system helps differentiate those who are making a difference from those who are simply telling a story. Again, that's the problem with the story not being sufficient. There are 25 GEARS Pioneer funds, half of them in the US, half in emerging markets. And over the next 3 months, we're going to be going into 30 countries, creating ratings for over 200 companies around the world that are using investment capital, business capital, to try to solve some of the world's most challenging problems. From sustainable, renewable energy water purification systems to anti-malarial bed nets in sub-Saharan Africa. All of this is happening at an incredibly historic time, from Bill Gates talking about creative capitalism, or Muhammad Yunus, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, talking about social business, or Thomas Friedman talking about the need for a green, sustainable economy as a national security imperative. As if we didn't need those reminders with a financial crisis and environmental disasters, et cetera. This is all happening at an incredibly important time in history, and we have an opportunity here and now to seize this opportunity to build a new sector of the economy that marries the power of business with the purpose of civil society, where organizations are founded to be purpose-driven, and their purpose is to help alleviate poverty, build stronger communities, create great places to work, and restore the environment. Thank you. Last piece. Is all of that, we talk about, the best story is a simple story. The simplest way to think about what B Corps represent and what this is to think about applying the golden rule to business. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But don't just take their word for it. Make sure it's backed up by standards. And if we can do that, that'll be the greatest story ever told. Thank you very much.